Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Aspiring Polymath. My name is Micheline, and I'll be joining Kennedy on episode 7, Father of Medicine.
Hello, guys. Welcome back to the podcast. This is an episode I've been planning to record for a long, long time now. I think it was supposed to be my second or third episode, but I kind of got carried away with the interviews. They were pretty fun. That being said, the podcast is also supposed to be about learning. Not that you don't learn from the interviews, but more direct learning, I guess. So we'll be talking about one of my influences for starting the podcast today. He's a character from ancient Egypt. His name was Imhotep. Do you wanna talk a little bit about him, Micheline, before I go in?
Okay, so I don't really know much about him, but what I do know is he was an Egyptian polymath. And a polymath is basically a person who's an expert in like many areas of learning. And he was also born in like Memphis, Egypt around 2667 BC.
No, very exact. I wanted to leave out the 67 part because I'm just like, how could you? I don't know how they can know so precisely what year exactly, but I guess it's an estimation. It's an estimate. But yeah, Imhotep was an Egyptian polymath. He lived around. I prefer to say he lived around 2600 BCE. He lived during the reign of Pharaoh Zoser. I call him Joser, but apparently his name is pronounced Zoser. And he also lived through the reigns of two pharaohs after that. Well, at least one, Sekemket, and the other one I forget his name, in the third dynasty. And like you said, he was born near Memphis. He was also a commoner. He wasn't born in the royal family, which will be surprising considering what else happened in his life after that. Imhotep means he who comes in peace. That's the meaning of his name. So why was he a polymath? He was a polymath because he was he had his hands in a number of fields. I believe he started out as a priest. He later became high priest. He was an architect. He was Zoser's architect for his step pyramid. He was his vizier, which is like kind of like a prime minister like position in modern terms. I mentioned this a little bit in the first episode in Genesis, I believe. He was also a sage. Like, he was known to be very wise and knowledgeable in a number of topics. He was a poet. He was a mathematician. He was an astronomer, also astrologer, depending on how you want to define it. Yeah, he had his hands in a lot of things. Like, I don't know. He was the Renaissance man before Renaissance man even existed. So
So
he was a
who
very remarkable individual.
so who taught him in all these areas? Did he like train himself or did he have people to look up to?
That's a very good question, and it's the answer to that question is difficult. I haven't found any information that would answer that question, but I don't know, I'll take a stab at it, I guess. When I say he was a priest, the priests in ancient Egypt were not just priests in that they were experts on religious matters only or spiritual matters. I think they were also very learned. So the priests then would have been learned about things like astronomy, for instance, perhaps even medicine,
Okay.
a number of other subjects. So I'm guessing he picked up a lot of the information from there, but he would also have did a lot of studying himself. Like, as a physician, he practiced as a physician a little bit. He also probably did a lot of his own experiments, a lot of his own research to learn more because he was very very renowned physician in his time.
Okay.
Yeah, so my guess is most of that information, a lot of that information, he picked up just being a priest or being in the priestly order, becoming a high priest also. But most of it is due to his own individual brilliance too.
Okay.
But I don't know. There's a lot we don't know about that time. There's a lot of information out there about that time. Some of it is assumed, some of it is confirmed, but there's plenty that we don't know about how they lived. So who's to say where he picked it up? So Imhotep supposedly diagnosed and treated over 200 diseases in his lifetime, which I don't know by modern standards might not sound too impressive, but back then that was very impressive. These diseases included stuff like tuberculosis, appendicitis, gout, gallstones, arthritis, a few other things. At the time would have plagued people, and they wouldn't have known what to do about it. Something like tuberculosis, especially, which I believe is caused by bacteria, which Western medicine was not even aware of until what the 1600s, 1700s.
Hmm.
I think even in the American Civil War, they didn't really know. I think that was when Western medicine was really beginning to understand the effects of bacteria on the human body and how antibiotics might help or how bacteria infected people. Even I don't know, very late into the 1800s, people would still like try to fish out bullets from people's bodies with their fingers and stuff,
Yes.
infecting the wounds and everything. So it's very impressive that 4,500 years ago or 4,600 years ago, there was an Egyptian physician who presumably knew enough about bacteria to cure something like tuberculosis.
I actually have a question about that. I saw that you named your podcast Father of Medicine, but to most
You
people,
mean the episode?
Hippocrates is the father of medicine. So why doesn't Imhotep really get as much recognition?
Oh, you mean the episode? Okay. Yeah. That's a good question. That's a very good question. So Hippocrates, for those who don't know, is a Greek physician. I believe he was a physician, Greek physician, who is credited as being the father of medicine. If you don't know who Hippocrates is, then you might recognize his name as the root for the Hippocratic oath, the oath that doctors take to do no harm when they become doctors. It's called the Hippocratic Oath, and it gets its name from Hippocrates. So why is Imhotep not as recognized as Hippocrates? A number of reasons for that. The first being Hippocrates is just more popular, and that's because a lot of the things that we know about the ancient world comes from the Romans and the Greeks. And a lot of the narrative of what we know about the ancient world today comes from Western historians, Western philosophers, and the like, who tended to identify with the Greek and the Roman philosophers. That's why we know so much about Socrates, Plato, we know about Seneca, we know about Marcus Aurelius,
Yes.
all of those popular guys, Pythagoras, what have you. But we don't know a lot about Arab philosophers or Arab
And
mathematicians or physicians like um a lot of people don't know about Avicenna, for instance. His real name is Ibn Sina. Nigerians might know about him because there's a school in Nigeria called Avicenna. But there are people like that, like the Arabs who created the number zero, for instance, that allowed a lot of mathematical operations to be possible. Basically, they invented base 10 mathematics as far as we know it anyways. So there's a lot of people like that are lost in history because Western history doesn't focus on them. And the same thing happened to African scientists, mathematicians, polymaths in general, people like Imhotep, because Western history does not focus on them. But take Pythagoras, for instance, it's a great example. Or Archimedes. Archimedes is credited as having basically there's a story about honestly, I forget how the story goes. It has something to do with the king's crown and the bathtub and something. But basically, he discovered the principle of density, how density worked, and displacement of volume and density. He discovered how that worked, something to do with the king's crown. And there's an old story. You can go look it up. Look up the story about Archimedes and density. You'll find it. But basically, a lot of the scientific concepts that we know, scientific and mathematical concepts, are credited to the Greeks because they're the ones that told the story at the time. So we think Pythagoras invented Pythagoras' theorem that you've heard about because defining how three sides of a triangle are related, great, wonderful. But It's not possible. I put it to you, it's not possible that Pythagoras is the first person that discovered the relationship between three sides of a triangle.
Yes,
When people were
I'm pretty
come
sure they
again?
took information from like different sources and just developed it and then gave themselves credit at the end.
Yeah, like people were building pyramids in Egypt long before Pythagoras discovered that. A pyramid is basically a three-dimensional triangle. How do you build a massive pyramid that's hundreds of feet high without understanding the relationship between the three sides of a triangle? I don't think that's possible.
Yeah.
So it makes no sense to me that Pythagoras is credited as being the one who discovered that theorem. But I mean, I won't even say to the victor goes the spoils, because it wasn't a case of the Greeks. Although the Greeks did conquer Egypt eventually, they did take over Egypt, but I don't think this was a case of that. It's just they're the ones who told the stories, so they're the ones who get all the glory in the stories. A lot of people don't know this, but Pythagoras was actually a student in Egypt for 22 years.
Wow.
I think it was 22 or 23 years. So a lot of what he learned, presumably, he learned in Egypt. He learned a lot of that stuff in Egypt. And it's not like, okay, he studied there 22 years and he decided to leave. He actually left Egypt because Egypt was conquered by the Babylonians at some point, the Persians, whichever. I tend to get those civilizations mixed up. But Egypt was conquered by the Persians at some point, and that was why Pythagoras' studies in Egypt ended. So there was a lot to learn from the Egyptians at the time. They were masters of mathematics, astronomy, medicine, science, as we see now. So I don't know.
Yeah, they were really
But
well
going back to your
developed.
question, say again.
I said they were really well developed.
Yeah, going back to your question, I'm getting a little bit carried away. Why is Hippocrates widely regarded as the father of medicine and not Imhotep? It's because most people don't even know who Imhotep is. Most people have never even heard the name Imhotep before, even though the Egyptians are the ones that the Greeks learned a lot of the things they learned from. They learned a lot of those things from the Egyptians. So the Greeks just have better PR, basically. It's the short answer to your question.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, but that was a pretty good question, though. So yeah, there's some evidence of Imhotep's work in medicine. One of the more popular ones is called the Edwin Smith Papyrus. It's a document that's written in Egyptian hieroglyphics or hieratic script, basically a shorthand, and it talks about different anatomical terms, different treatments to diseases and injuries and stuff like that. Supposedly, it's a work of Imhotep from later times. I don't know how accurate that is. You can look that up yourself. But it shows how important his work was, even at the time, and even to the point where in the I think it was late 1900s when that was found, it was still considered impressive.
Okay.
Yeah, and Imhotep, this was crazy when I saw this. Imhotep was writing about medicine over 2,000 years before Hippocrates was born. So it's kind of wild for people to say, like, oh, Hippocrates is the father of medicine. I'm sure somebody could make an argument to say that, okay, maybe he had a more scientific method approach towards medicine. Maybe, I don't know. But in order to say that conclusively, you'd have to know how Imhotep approached it as well. But we do know the Greeks definitely learned from his work. There's no argument of that.
For a
So Hippocrates
commoner,
didn't become Hippocrates in a vacuum.
it's amazing to see how smart and versatile he is.
Yeah, it is. It is. Um, one thing about Egypt is, even though they had like a royal system and commoners didn't exactly have the highest stations. From the little I won't say little, but from what I've read about their society, people who were part of the priestly orders they were very, very learned people. Like they were very knowledgeable. They learned a lot of things. So that's not what's so surprising. That's not the thing that surprises me about him being a commoner. The fact that he knew so much is not what's surprising. Is the way he was honored that's surprising. But anyways, we'll get to that part later on. I don't want to skip too far ahead and ruin the story
Okay.
for everyone. But anyways, Imhotep was credited with building the first ever school of medicine in the world, as far as we know. Who knows? There might have been another one first, but the first ever school of medicine on record was built in Memphis, Egypt, by Imhotep, supposedly. He also was in charge of the construction of the Great Step Pyramid in Saqqara, which was built to be 204 feet tall, the
Wow.
tallest structure of its time. It might not be very impressive today to people who see skyscrapers every day, but in 2500 BCE, 4,600 years ago, 2600 BCE, that was very impressive. That's a very impressive structure to build. And the Egyptians would go on to build grander pyramids later on in Giza, specifically, later on in the third dynasty. But a lot of them took inspiration from this early pyramid and they just made it bigger and better and added more and more to his designs. Some people even claim that even the later pyramids um, were based almost solely on his designs, but I don't know, can't really substantiate those claims.
Of course.
But it definitely took influence from his inspiration from his design. He was so impressive that the pharaoh decided to put his name on the pyramid. That was what really surprised me. That's usually, from what I've read anyway, that's something that was not done. It was a very high honor.
Hmm.
He was very highly valued by Pharaoh Zoser and clearly one or two other pharaohs after him as well. The construction of the pyramids also inspired the Greeks. A lot of Greeks would go to Egypt at the time to learn about mathematics, philosophy, what have you, like I mentioned before. And their cultures were so different. Like there's a story I read a long time ago about the Greeks going to Egypt, and they found it so surprising. Now I don't know if this is true or not, but this is something from a Greek account. I'm not sure if it's true or not, but the account was talking about how the Egyptian men would pee. They would squat to pee, like they wouldn't stand to pee like most men do. And the Greeks were basically making fun of them that what kind of man squats to pee. For whatever reason, that's just what they did in their culture, supposedly, according to the Greeks. You have to go look into that yourself. But I'm just saying this to say, like, their cultures were so different at the time, but the Greeks still respected them enough to learn from them, to go there and learn from them. Like, look at someone like Pythagoras dedicating 22 years of his life to learning in Egypt. And that kind of thing is something that the Egyptians did for a long, long time after that. Even as late as Alexander the Great's time, the Library of Alexandria was still like the place of learning. Even when the Greeks had taken over Egypt at the time,
Hmm.
it was still the place to go learn. Like there, the number of things that were kept in that library that were lost when the library, I think was burned down, was just astounding, really. So Egypt has been a place of learning for a very, very, very long time, longer than most people even know history about. So
It's crazy to see how Egypt doesn't get that much recognition compared to like other places today. Like, I don't really learn about anything in Egypt. They'll only pick out like a few things, but they never really go into depth.
yeah, I think a lot of again, I don't want to beat on the Greeks too much, but I think a lot of the recognition that Egypt is owed is erroneously attributed to the Greeks. Like there are a lot of things the Greeks are given credit for that they actually did not come up with themselves. They learned a lot of those things from the Egyptians. Obviously, they invented some of their own stuff too, and they did some innovation too after that. But they learned a lot of things from the Greeks. A lot of the mathematics we attribute to the Greeks, going back to Pythagoras, the science, Archimedes. I'm sure there are others I'm not even remembering right now. A lot of those things, there's no way the Egyptians did not think of those things first. Like you don't build massive pyramids like that without a healthy understanding of mathematics, physics, architecture. Like it's no, there's just no way. It doesn't make any sense. So in a way, it's very silly the way we kind of attribute those things to the Greeks and kind of do a see no evil, hear no evil approach and pretend we don't know like there are older civilizations that built things like that. Not even just the Egyptians, even the Mesopotamians had they didn't theirs were not called pyramids; they're called ziggurats, I think, or maybe it's Babylonian. I think the Mesopotamians built ziggurats. Somebody fact check me on that. I don't know, but they had their own structures as well. So there are many older civilizations that knew about these things, but the Greeks are the ones that had enough PR to claim credit for it, basically, and claim that they discovered the concept of density and discovered what's it called, fluid displacement or displacement of volume, whatever you want to call it. So again, it's surprising, but a lot of people just need to do their own research at this point. Like there are enough resources out there to learn about civilizations like this, to learn about these things. Funny enough, the first place I ever heard the name Imhotep was from this movie, The Mummy. I'm sure most people have heard about it. The original Mummy with what's his name, Brendan Fraser. I think it's Brendan Fraser. I think it was made in like maybe 98, 99, something like that. Mummy Returns, and they made a third one with Jet Li, I think. So that was the first place where I heard about Imhotep,
Mhm.
and he's the bad guy in the movie. I don't know if it's the same Imhotep, but I'm sure it's loosely based on him somehow because this Imhotep was also a priest. He was the high priest of um he was the high priest of the Temple of Horus or something like that. Something like that. He was a priest. So he was a very important person. He was like the second to the pharaoh, basically in the kingdom.
Okay.
I don't remember if they mentioned the pharaoh's name in the movie. They probably did in Mummy Returns, but it was just interesting. Like the first time I ever hear the name Imhotep, he's the villain in the movie. He's the mummy that comes back, that's resurrected and starts killing everybody, and basically is trying to end the world. So it's kind of, I don't know. I don't want to say that there's anything intentional going on there, but it is weird that the first time you hear his name, he's a bad guy,
Yeah.
and that's all you hear about him. He's a bad guy. He was having an affair with the pharaoh's wife, and that was why he got caught and he got mummified alive because of that, and he was cursed basically.
Yeah, with certain things, I don't think you can find them in like your everyday history books or even in libraries. Like you're really gonna have to like dig deep for yourself to
Yeah,
gain a better
well, it was
understanding.
a lot of the times when I learn something in history, it comes from movies. Even though the movies are rarely ever accurate. Like I was just curious, like who was this Imhotep guy? And I went to look up his name. And I think that was how I heard about this historical Imhotep for the first time. I didn't really dig that much into it, but that was when I first heard about the real person. And this was a long time ago. This was probably like maybe 12, 13 years ago. I don't know. But that was the first time I was just curious. I was like, okay, let me see who this person is. Very often, that's how I learn more about history. Like we were talking about Vikings yesterday. Um, I learned a little bit about that period, early England in the 800s and the Vikings before, but I didn't really know that much about Scandinavians until I saw the show Vikings, and then I got curious and I went to look up the main character Ragnar Lothbrok, and then you get to learn a little bit more about how the Vikings lived and separate what was fact from what is fiction and what they're just making out to be a story on the show. I watched The Last Kingdom, and that got me even more interested. And you get to learn a little bit more. Like fiction, even though you don't always get facts, is very helpful to open your eyes to a story you've never known about before. But the problem is a lot of people watch that stuff and they're like, oh wow, this is cool, whatever. They love Vikings. And then it ends there. They don't take it any further than that. But it's a great opportunity to learn more stuff. You just, peek behind the curtain a little bit. There's a lot you'll learn that you never even knew about. But going on about Imhotep here, one of the most remarkable things about him is after his death, he was deified, he was made into a demigod, and later on he was made into the god of medicine and wisdom. Funny thing is, when the Greeks eventually came back to Egypt and they took over Egypt, they started to basically they had this weird thing that they did where they started to link their own gods to the Egyptian gods. I'm not sure if that was because of the local population, maybe to make the local population feel more at ease, or maybe because they really believed it. Who knows? Like they linked Zeus to Ra, the sun god, or Re, however you want to pronounce it, and they linked Imhotep to Asclepius, who is the Greek god of medicine. So he was so renowned at that time
Mm-hmm.
that they basically considered him the Egyptian version of their own Greek god of medicine. So that I thought that was pretty cool. He's also only one of two commoners to ever have been deified, made into a demigod in Egypt. I think all the other people who were deified were pharaohs. I think they were all pharaohs. Typically, the pharaohs were regarded as like living gods almost. And whenever they would die, they would be deified and made into gods. I'm not sure which pharaoh started that practice. Don't quote me on that. I'm not sure which pharaoh started that, but I know at some point that was the case. So Imhotep is a very interesting character, and I'm planning this to be like the first of a series of different polymaths that I'm going to talk about. I have a whole list of polymaths and other individuals too. Like a short while ago, I did a little poll on Instagram, and somebody was requesting an episode like this of Marcus Garvey. There are a couple other people that some people requested. I need to go look on my list. I have a whole list of them. I'm going to be talking about people like Newton, not only from the mathematical or physics point of view, but also his interest in theology. A lot of people are not aware of how much he was interested in theology. We'll be talking about Young. I always forget his first name, but Young, mathematician. He was also involved in Egyptology a lot, which is interesting because it kind of connects back to Egypt and Imhotep. So maybe I'll do Young next. I don't know. We'll see.
Also, if
But
you
there's
guys
a
have
long
any
list of them.
suggestions, you can always text any
Yeah,
one of us. And
if you have suggestions, you can tag the page on Instagram. You could DM on Instagram. You could comment on YouTube. Number of ways you could go about that, but just send me your suggestions. Send us your suggestions, and yeah, we'll try to make an episode out of whatever it is you want to learn about, not just history or um, polymaths, finance, music. Although I think I think I've done enough music for the time
Mhm.
being, but yeah, finance, history, politics, that kind of thing. Anything like that's of interest that you would like to learn about. But yeah, this I actually had a lot of fun researching Imhotep's story. Like I knew a little bit about him, but I still learned some new things when I was doing this research. Like I suspected he was a priest, but I wasn't sure. And I didn't know that he was actually named high priest of the temple at some point. I didn't know he had cured so many diseases. Like the tuberculosis one surprised me. That was impressive. I was impressed by that.
Yeah, me
Even
too.
arthritis.
It's just crazy to see how just a regular person like that can know so much, can be so versatile in like different areas.
Yeah, I won't go as far as to say that he was a regular person, though. I mean,
Eh,
we I don't know. It's kind of like saying like Einstein is a regular person. You know, it's in theory anybody could get really proficient in a number of fields, but I don't know that everybody would be able to do it at the level that he did it. Like he was in his society, at least, he was the best architect at the time, which at the time also meant he was the best engineer, kind of. He was the most renowned physician, probably the best physician at the time. Also,
mhm.
he was also being the vizier. He had to also be a politician, a diplomat, one of the best at the time. Also, like that's hard. That's a number of very difficult lines of work, basically, and he's the best at least three of them. That's incredibly difficult to do. So, in modern terms, he's I won't even say he's an Einstein. He's
He's
I don't
more
know.
than.
He's a little bit more versatile than that. Even he's more versatile than that because Einstein was primarily in one or two fields. Einstein was not the best mathematician ever. He wasn't. A lot of people don't know that, but he wasn't. I mean, being a great physicist, of course, he was good at mathematics, but he was not the best mathematician.
Mhm.
As far as physics went, he was known more for his thought experiments than hard theoretical work. Even though he worked at a patent office and stuff like that, but his thing was physics basically. Newton is even more diverse than Einstein because he had his hands in a number of different fields. But even Newton was not the best at all of those fields. So
Yes.
putting things into perspective, his story is actually quite impressive. He was a genius. Basically, he had to be a genius to be that good in so many fields. So I don't know, I wouldn't really call him a regular person. But I kind of get what you're saying. Like he was a commoner. I guess is what you're trying to say.
Hmm.
At the time when commoners were like at the bottom of the food chain, we say that because it's still true today. The modern equivalent of commoners is still at the bottom of the food chain.
Yeah.
But I guess today there's more opportunity to learn. Like knowledge is still being hoarded. Actually, people still hoard knowledge today. Like there are a lot of things the average person would never have access to. But with the internet, the playing field is a little bit, it's more level. I won't say a little bit, but it's definitely more level.
Hmm.
But it's still not. We're still not on equal footing. Basically, like the average person does not have access to the same information that Bill Gates has
Yes.
access to, or Elon Musk. There are things Elon Musk knows that you have no way of finding out today. It doesn't. I don't care how long you surf the internet, unless you, I don't know, unless you have links to the dark web or you hack people for that information or something. I don't know how you would come about that information. You have to be on like a WikiLeaks
Hmm.
level to be able to come across information like that. So yeah, information is still being hoarded. So the average person today is still at a disadvantage. But back then it was a lot more to surmount back then. So yeah, I get what you're saying. Makes sense.
But then a lot
Yeah,
of the information was discovered by those people, you know?
exactly. Which is why it's even more impressive
Hmm.
because they were the pioneers learning all these things. If he was trying new poultices or new remedies to cure a disease at the time, some of those things he was trying, probably nobody had tried it before. And now we have the hindsight of learning from their mistakes, like, oh, yeah, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. So it's even more impressive when they learned how to do stuff like that.
Hmm.
Like building feats like building those pyramids, maybe not necessarily his own, but the pyramids that they built later on in Giza, they're feats that were never actually reproduced. Like nobody ever reproduced stuff like that. Even in modern times, without the use of modern technology, most people would be hard pressed to. I don't even know if anybody could reproduce those pyramids
I don't think anybody
with the
can.
same resources that those people had at the time. Well, I don't think we have the know-how to reproduce those pyramids.
Yeah.
So it's still very impressive. You want to add anything before we close out here?
No, I think I learned a lot from this.
Yeah, this was definitely fun. At first, I was kind of dragging my feet with the episode because honestly, the interviews are more. I don't know. It's just more fun because they're more interactive. Or at least that's what I thought. But when I was actually like trying to get my notes for this episode, right? Like, okay, it actually was interesting. It reminded me why I decided to do this in the first place. This was the original reason why I wanted to do this. Not only to help people learn stuff, but also to brush up on some things that I knew maybe I didn't know well enough, like Imhotep's story. There's a lot of things I learned by his story that I didn't know before. But also learning new things. Like if somebody requests a topic I don't know anything about, that would be cool. A cool way to learn something. Maybe that I may not have learned before. Maybe I never even heard about the thing that the person requests, but now I know when I have to dig in and learn about it.
Yeah, and then
So
you can
yeah, that's
also help other people learn. And you never know when you might need that information in the future. And you may just be the only person who knows about that topic.
yeah. I'm still planning to go on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire one day. We'll see. We'll see how that works. But anyways, thanks for tuning in, guys. I'm sure some of you are really happy. This is probably the shortest episode on rec. Well, apart from the first episode, it's probably the shortest episode on record. But thanks for tuning in. You're actually going to get 2 episodes for the price of one this weekend. And next week we are having. I actually already recorded the episode, but for chronological, just to keep my sanity, I'm gonna premiere it next week. It's the episode with White Manga, my good friend Odunze. It's a pretty good episode. You should definitely check it out if you're into manga or anime or that kind of thing. When I recorded the episode, he was at like he's a very popular YouTuber by the way. He was I can't remember where he was at, but he was close to 400k subscribers I just looked at his Instagram today. He has actually gone past 400K subscribers on YouTube. So congratulations to him. So just in case you listen to that episode and you're confused, it's because I recorded that episode. I recorded that episode like 2 weeks ago. So just in case you're confused, that's why I said close to 400K subscribers. But by now, he's already past 400K. So definitely by next weekend, he will still be over 400K. So don't be confused if you hear that. Just definitely check it out if you're into manga or anime, or if you want to find out about manga or anime, or if you're just into art or drawing, or if you just want to support the channel. Just bottom line is check out the episode. And I'll catch you guys next week. Don't forget to share, like on YouTube, subscribe on YouTube, follow Spotify, comment. Let me know what you want to learn about, and we'll see you guys or hear from you guys next week.
Thank you.